So how did this
The
lead
interesting
to?
thing about the gambling is, in the Woodbridge Country Club in Connecticut wanted a speaker on crooked gambling, and they, through also I think Walker, hired John Scotty, and Scotty, and this was a very elegant country club, still exists there in Woodbridge, Connecticut. Uh, Scotty came there, and he did card tricks. Now, John Scotty did not do a good, if he did a gambling lecture, I don't know if he ever did, because he claimed to do all this stuff all around the country, and claimed to work in the service and so on, but he never did. He was never in the service, and he never did anything like that. And they did card tricks. He did 4 races from the tricks, and he did cards from his mouth. Well, a person looking for a gambling lecture doesn't want to see people with saliva all over pulling cards from his mouth. So they were very, very disappointed, wanted no part of Scotty as a gambling expert, even though he was the renowned gambling expert to the public. They saw my name in his Walker's brochure that I did a gambling lecture, and they said to him, this was Bert Levy. Bert Levy was a person from the Woodbridge Country Club. And Bert Levy said, does this guy know gambling? We want a gambling lecture and not a magic show. And he said, yeah, they hired me. And I came and did the lecture on gambling at the Woodbridge Country Club. And I sat for an hour or so afterwards doing more things for them. And he said, gee, this is, you were just what we wanted. He was running, he and his partner were running the outfit that printed comic books and so on. And it was through him.
Was that Marvel?
Yeah, but the comic
DC Comics?
The comic books that he started doing stories on gambling. I was a character in the comic books, Racket Squad.
That was Racket
That's
Squad.
how I got in Racket Squad, because he saw the lecture.
Wow.
And he had, Walter Gibson was doing the stories. And so I became a character in Racket Squad that Scotty would have been if he did a gambling lecture. But he didn't do a gambling lecture. So I became friends with Bert Levy, and he did put me in this comic book, and which is collectible right now. And incidentally, one of the stories in the comic book is a true story. The others were fiction, which Walter and I made up. Where just, I was a guy who was going out catching the criminals, and we made it up. And but the one that was true was very interesting. Also, I was during the years that I was in the service, and I was in Sacramento, and there was a place I think at that time was, and my memory is not too great on that, whether it was Sacramento Butcher's Place or something like that. But this fellow was running an illegal gambling setup, and I somehow got to know about it, and I went there, and I got to talking to him. And in talking to him, I told him about the system I wrote up in the dice book on Radner on dice. I said, most people complain that they get lost with the long streaks. Some guy passes 8 times in a row and you get caught, or they get 7 or 8 miss-outs in a row and you get caught. I said, what if I told you there's a system that would catch all but one of them? So if someone goes through every long win streak or every long losing streak, you get, except for one. And they said, gee, that would be great. And it's very simple, by the way. All you do is you come into a strange game. If the more crooked it is, the better the system works, by the way. And this is the one way to beat a crooked game. If the game's crooked as can be, and they're switching dice in and out, you win more. What happens is you just bet pass if they pass, and miss outs if they miss out. All you do is bet that the dice will do what they just did. And obviously, if someone's passing dice in for miss outs, you're going to find yourself switching your bets without thinking. You're just doing the same thing. So you're going to catch every one except the last one, where they switch dice again. So
there was an incident. Let me interrupt you for a second. There was an incident in the Old Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas that the gentleman who ran the Chemin game, the Chemin de Fer game, it wasn't Baccarat, told me almost the exact story about how the house would cheat players that were playing Chemin de Fer, excuse me. Yeah. And the way they did it, they set the shoe up so the bank side would win, the player's side would win, the bank side would win, players,
this
bank,
system
players,
would catch this.
bank. So if anybody came in to play to follow the shoe, they'd have to lose. Nobody could do a perfect chop.
Yeah.
And that's how they would, they'd wait there with 4 shills, and if somebody sat down to play, they wouldn't last very long.
Yeah, the system is crazy. But then the fellow told me something interesting. He told me how they beat a guy in bowling. Now this one startled me. How do you cheat in bowling? And he said they gambled heavily with different people at bowling, so they wanted to take this one particular individual, and what they did is they saw the way he bowled. Most people bowl with the ball curves down and goes, whatever it is, it's the same way all the time. So they roughed up or changed the surface at the point where the ball would go there.
On the hook.
Either they slicked it or they changed it anyway. So they took this one alley and fixed up the alley. And then what they did is they came in one night to play this real heavy money game. And they say, well, how did he get him to play the right alley? They had that fixed. All the alleys were filled. And they had it fixed so that when they came in, the one alley that became empty was the one that they wanted to play at. So I was, in the comic book, Racket Squad in Action, I told that story, and I was the character that caught him. But it's a true story.
Tell us about the comments about Walter Gibson made, or you made, in the book there, How to Spot Card Sharps, about Andrews.
Well, Andrews,
referring to Erdnase.
It so happens that there were 2 or 3 people that told me that Andrews came from Holyoke, which was my hometown, where I was born and brought up. But they didn't tell me early enough. And they told me that Andrews married somebody and gave the name in Holyoke.
So you're talking about Andrews. Did you know his first name? Was it Milton Franklin Andrews?
It was not Franklin. It was. I'm not positive right at this moment.
James
But
Andrews.
it was definitely not James. It was the fellow that did it. And I knew that I started a research for when Whately was doing the book on Andrews. I did some research for him, and I found out where this fellow lived. He did live in Holyoke for a short time and came back at different times. There is no ifs or buts.
So did you know that he was Erdnase?
He was Andrews, let's put it that way.
He was Andrews, but did you know that he was a card sharp?
I talked to a member of his family, one of his nieces or so, and they said that he did magic and he did card tricks, and he wrote a book in the field. This was verified. There's no ifs or buts. That was verified. Because now if somebody had told me 30 years ago that he was there, I could have gotten all the evidence, because there were people alive in that family. They were, but when if you wait until they all die, all you've got is hearsay. But there was no question in my mind when I did the research for Whately at the time that a guy by the name of Andrews did marry a person in Holyoke, did go out west, did end up and it was a gambler, with no ifs or buts, did write a book that was published, and all these facts all fit. And this is what Dave Vernon also told me. Dave Vernon told me the fellow who lived in Holyoke, and so did, what's his name you mentioned? who was Dean of American Magicians. Anyway, they both told me. But the trouble with the Andrews information is it was always a mystery, and the ones that knew anything were all saving their information to write a book someday or write a story. So as a result, nobody could really check anything.